I drove out to Old Georgetown Asylum in the middle of a storm because I'd spent 11 years telling other people not to feed their obsessions, and mine was done being ignored. I'm Dr. Mara Ellison. I'm a psychologist. Most of my work has been in locked units and county evaluations, the kind with vinyl chairs bolted to the floor and a staff buzzer that clicks before any door opens. When I was 13, my mother spent 19 days in a psychiatric wing after she tried to walk across the eastbound lanes on Route 6. She came home with paper-thin skin under the hospital tape and a habit of tapping 4 slow beats on the kitchen table whenever she got tired. She never said much about that place. The only thing she ever said was that the building they put her in was new paint over old habits. Georgetown had already been shut down for decades by then, but everybody in town knew the county hospital had inherited its staff, its records, and a lot of its methods. So when a clerk I knew at the courthouse told me the developer who bought the Georgetown property was clearing it out by the end of the week, I went. I told myself I wanted documentation. Old charts, evidence, maybe something I could use for the testimony I was preparing on restraint abuse. That was the sensible reason. The real reason was that for months I'd been dreaming about a hallway I'd never seen, with the rain ticking against wired glass and somebody tapping 4 beats on the other side of a locked door. The asylum sat where it always had, past the edge of town, behind a stand of black pine and second-growth maple. My wipers kept smearing the rain instead of clearing it. The iron gate gave when I shoved it with both hands, and the hinges screamed loud enough to make me glance back at my car, half expecting a porch light to flip on somewhere. Nothing did. Just my Civic sitting crooked in the gravel turnout, and the red blink of the alarm I'd set twice. The path to the main building had vanished under weeds and wet vines. Then the place rose out of the rain all at once, a brick block with narrow windows and a center section taller than the rest. The old intake awning still hung over the front steps, one chain snapped so it leaned left. Georgetown had been built in 1911, back when they liked their institution solid enough to swallow a person whole. Even through the rain, I could smell wet plaster and leaf mold. Inside, my flashlight landed on a lobby ruined equally by time and bored kids. A reception desk lay on its side. The floor was terrazzo under a crust of dirt and broken glass. A row of metal chart hooks still clung to one wall, empty except for a strip of yellowed masking tape that fluttered whenever the wind found a crack. The mildew smell hit first. Under that was something sweeter, maybe rotten fabric, maybe old paper gone soft with water. I stood there longer than I had to, listening to the building settle into itself. Rain hammered the roof. Water moved through pipes somewhere inside the walls. A loose window pane clicked every few seconds. I almost laughed at myself. It was an empty building in bad weather. That was all. I pulled out my phone to start an audio note, got one weak bar, and shoved it back into my jacket when the screen fogged over. The symbols started a little farther down the main corridor. They weren't really graffiti. The paint had soaked into the plaster instead of sitting on top of it. Circles crossed by 3 short lines over and over at shoulder height in some places, close to the floor in others. One had been drawn around an old fire alarm pull station. Another sat above a doorway with the remains of a sign plate still bolted beside it. I ran my thumb near one of the marks without touching it. The wall around it felt colder than the rest. Something skittered behind a toppled linen cart. Claws on tile. I flinched so hard the flashlight beam jumped to the ceiling and caught water stains spreading around an old sprinkler head. "Rat," I said out loud because hearing my own voice helped. The records room was off a side hall behind a warped wooden door. When I pushed it open, file folders had spilled everywhere, swollen with damp, their corners curled and split. Rusted cabinets lined the wall, and a long table sat in the middle with ring stains from coffee cups that had been set down and forgotten half a century ago. I knelt and started reading labels. Most of it was useless. Mildewed meal logs, supply requisitions, maintenance forms. Then I found a hard-backed case file with a red stripe across the top and a typed label still readable under the dust. Cass 137, Silas Crew. I took it to the table and opened it under the flashlight. Admitted June 1952. Male, 34. Transferred from the county jail after episodes of agitation and disordered religious language, though the notes that followed had less to do with belief than control. Sleep deprivation, prolonged isolation, insulin shock, repetitive auditory conditioning. Page after page of observation notes had been written in a hand so sharp it looked carved into the paper. Patient no longer resists. Patient repeats the sequence when prompted. Patient responds to 4-tap cue. I stopped there. At the bottom of one page, in different ink, somebody had drawn the same symbol I'd seen in the hall. Not neatly, fast, almost absent-minded. My mother used to draw that exact shape on the backs of grocery receipts after she came home. I'd found one once tucked inside a cookbook and asked what it meant. She crushed the paper into a ball so hard her knuckles turned white, then said she didn't remember drawing it. A bang cracked through the hallway outside. Not thunder. This was inside the building. Metal hitting plaster, then rolling. My flashlight flickered once. The beam came back thin and yellow around the edges. I should have left right then. I know how that sounds. Any reasonable person would have gone straight back to the car. Instead, I tucked the file under my arm and stepped into the hall because the noise had come from close by and because some ugly part of me needed to know if I'd finally found the thread that ran from Georgetown to my mother's kitchen table. The corridor opened into what had once been the operating theater. The room still had the half-circle viewing gallery above, separated by wired glass gone cloudy with age. Down below, 2 rusted instrument trays stood beside a surgical lamp hanging low over a table with cracked black padding. An enamel sink was bolted to the wall. One faucet dripped steadily into a basin stained orange around the drain. The smell in there had weight. Wet rust, old chemicals, and underneath it a sweet note that turned my stomach. A dark patch stained the table, wide as a dinner plate, sunk deep into the padding. The door slammed behind me. The sound shot through my teeth. I spun, dropped the file, grabbed the knob with both hands, and yanked. It didn't move. My palm slipped on the wet metal. The flashlight died, came back, died again. In the black between one flicker and the next, I heard whispering. Not wind, not pipes. Words crowded over each other, too low to make out, close to my ears, and far away at the same time. A woman muttering fast, a man saying no, no, no from somewhere near the ceiling. Breathing, bare feet on tile. When the light steadied, somebody was standing in the far corner by the sink. At first I thought it was a coat hanging from a peg, then it lifted its head. He was thin enough to disappear if you turned sideways. Hospital whites hung off him in damp strips. His eyes looked shoved too deep into his face, and the skin around his mouth had split at both corners a long time ago and healed crooked. He took one step forward, then another, careful, the way people move when they've spent too long in restraints and don't trust their own balance. "Help us," he said. The voice barely carried, but it was there. Air moving over ruined vocal cords. "Free us!" I backed into the door and slammed my shoulder into it once, twice, hard enough to bruise. The third time the swollen wood gave, and I spilled into the hall with one shoe half off, dragging in air that smelled like plaster dust and rain. The whispering followed me. I ran. My flashlight bounced over peeled paint, door frames, a wheelchair tipped into a corner. At the end of the hall, I saw a red exit sign and almost cried with relief, but it led into a ward instead of outside. Georgetown had that old institutional layout where everything connected badly to everything else, like the building had been designed by committee and cruelty. The ward was a long room broken up by partial walls, rusted beds, mattresses split open, stuffing pushed out in gray ropes, a dented bedside locker, an overhead speaker with its grill bent inward. More of the symbols were painted across the walls, this time in dark brown streaks that had run before drying. I stopped because the ward looked still. Ordinary for a ruin. My breath scraped in my throat. I bent over, planted my hands on my knees, and told myself I was turned around, that I'd scared myself in a condemned building full of drafts and old stories. Then the first bed frame rattled. Not hard. Just a quick metal chatter, 1 foot scraping tile. The overhead speaker hissed to life and let out a burst of sound that dropped my stomach. At first it wasn't words, just overlapping voices, crying. Somebody coughing wet and deep, somebody pleading in that flat, exhausted tone patients use after they've learned nobody is coming. Then, under all of it, clear as a fingernail on glass, came 4 slow taps. The same spacing my mother used at the kitchen table. I backed away until my heel found open air. A stairwell door stood cracked behind me, and cold air climbed up from below, carrying the smell of stone and standing water. The voices in the ward swelled all at once. I went down because they were behind me, and because my body had already decided before my mind caught up. The basement steps were concrete, worn hollow in the middle. My flashlight beam shook over pipes wrapped in unraveling insulation, floor drains clogged with leaves, and walls painted that old hospital green that always looks sickly, even when it's fresh. At the bottom was a row of cells. Real cells, iron bars, sliding food slots, rust so thick it had puffed onto the floor beneath the hinges. In the third one, a figure sat folded into the corner. He lifted his head when my light hit him, and I knew him before I let myself admit it. The long face from the operating theater. The same split mouth. Silas Crew, or whatever part of him Georgetown had kept. This time he got to his feet too smoothly. Not stronger, just purposeful. He didn't speak. He only raised one hand and crooked 2 fingers once, then turned. The cell door stood open. I followed him past the cells and through a narrow service corridor I never would have found on my own. We passed a hydrotherapy room with porcelain tubs sunk into concrete platforms and leather straps floating in black water. We passed an old laundry chute with a little brass plate stamped linens. At the far end was a steel door almost hidden under flaking paint. The same symbol had been drawn over it again and again until the lines blurred together. Silas pressed his palm to the door, then to the center of his own chest. That was it. Inside was a room no bigger than my office, no windows, stone walls. The symbols covered every surface from floor to ceiling, layered so thick they looked scratched in rather than painted. In the middle sat a chest on iron feet, ornate in a way that didn't belong in a county asylum. Dark wood, brass corners, a keyhole with no key. I could hear something before I touched it, a soft, wet knock. Then another. 4 slow beats, then silence, then 4 more. My fingers slipped on the lid. When it opened, the smell hit me first, metallic and sweet. Inside, nested in stained velvet, sat a glass jar full of dark liquid. A heart hung in it, pale and heavy, tethered by nothing I could see. Every few seconds it tightened in on itself and tapped the glass from the inside. I stared at it long enough to lose track of everything else in the room. Silas was beside me now, close enough that I could hear the scrape in his breathing. He put one hand on the jar. The skin on his fingers looked waterlogged, almost transparent. Then he looked at me, not pleading, expecting. Maybe I guessed what he wanted. Maybe he put the idea in my head. I still don't know. I took the jar with both hands. It was warm, I dropped it onto the stone floor. Glass burst under my shoes. The liquid splashed up my legs and across my wrists. The heart gave one hard contraction, then stopped. The sound that came next didn't come from one place. It moved through the walls, the pipes, the floor under my feet. A scream, yes, but braided with dozens of other sounds inside it, like the whole building had found a throat. Dust rained from the ceiling. The chest tipped onto its side. The symbols around me lit up in a dull red wash, not bright, just enough to make the room look lined with fresh cuts, and then they sank back into the stone. Silas smiled. It wasn't relief. It was smaller than that, almost private. One corner of his mouth lifted where the scar tissue pulled tight. "Thank you," he said, or at least I think he did. The room was shaking by then. He faded the way breath leaves a mirror. There, then thinning, then gone. A rush of air moved through the basement, not wind from outside, more like a long sealed duct opening somewhere deep in the building. The pressure in my ears changed. The voices stopped. After that, I ran without the flashlight. I left it on the floor beside the broken jar. I hit the stairs with one hand on the rail and the other clamped around the case file. I didn't remember picking back up. By the time I burst through the front doors, dawn was starting to break behind the trees. The storm had moved east. Water dripped from the eaves in steady ticks. Georgetown stood quiet behind me, every window blind and blank. I made it to my car, locked the doors, and sat there shaking hard enough to rattle my keys against the steering column. The first light of morning showed black stains drying on my cuffs. My phone had recorded 48 minutes of audio, but when I played it back later, most of it was rain and my own footsteps. In the last 3 minutes, under the sound of breaking glass, there are 4 slow taps. Them breathing that doesn't match mine. For a while, I told myself I'd done something good in that building. That I'd ended whatever Georgetown had been using to pin those voices in place. Some nights I still almost believe it, but the symbols didn't stay in Georgetown. They show up in the margins of my session notes when I know I didn't draw them. Patients who have never heard of the place trace them on the paper covering the exam table while they talk about their insomnia. And every so often, when the house is quiet and the refrigerator motor has cut off and even the street outside has gone still, I hear 4 damp knocks from somewhere behind me. Not from the walls, from inside my chest, answering something in the room.